Okay, you're recording. Okay, great. Robert Stark here. I'm joined here with Deep Left. Deep Left, it's great speaking with you.
It's great speaking with you as well, Robert.
So you come across as pretty independent. You come across as pretty independent minded with fairly eclectic views. I know some of the people you've interviewed, a lot of them have been more right leaning guests, which the left might hate you for. But just to start things off, like what are some of the key reasons that you identify as a leftist or more with the left?
Yeah, I think that the two big things are reproductive rights and foreign policy. I mean, there's other things that are important to me, like environmentalism. I also think structurally, if you if your intention is to destroy the country, which I think that is the most energetic and idealistic people on the right, that is their intention. They do want to help Russia or China, and they do want to have a violent coup or a January 6th or something. If that's your intention, then you're going to pursue a different strategy than me. But for my part, I feel like if you want to govern the country in the best way, if you think America's a force for good in the world, then you have to work within our institutions. That's not to say that our institutions are perfect or that they don't deserve critique. Absolutely. But
I also
um,
want to add something. What you're saying was a pretty standard conservative view not that long ago. It's just that there's been this big realignment recently.
I would certainly agree with you that we don't have to actually go back super far to find a Republican Party that's better on most issues. If we want to talk about reproductive rights, I don't think that Barry Goldwater was so much more conservative than Lyndon Johnson or something on the issue of abortion. I don't think that on foreign policy, I don't think that George Bush or Mitt Romney was so isolationist, and you could make the opposite case. You could say that you know
So by agreeing more with the left in foreign policy, do you mean left is an anti-war, or the kind of newer Democratic Party that's more internationalist and interventionist?
Well, I have a deeper historical view of these questions, so I think that and I also think it's superficial to equate all foreign conflicts into one basket and call it war. I understand that there is a history of non interventionism in this country, starting with George Washington talking about do not get into entangling alliances. I also am aware that, there's an abolitionist tradition, there's an anti colonial tradition, there's an anti imperialist tradition. And there's a pacifistic tradition. So Henry Thoreau and others were anti-war as a point of deontology. Morally they believe war is always wrong. And you could call that a left wing. I'm happy we can say that for their part, the Amish are left wing in this respect. But I think taking a broader historical perspective, especially with the Democrat Party, is that Woodrow Wilson is the man who probably engineered the greatest shift in American foreign policy in history. We had been going on this manifest destiny, westward expansion.
And I think that is true. Obviously, there is a tradition of interventionism in the Democratic Party, but I'm just kind of thinking like as like a millennial, I came of age during the Bush era when back then like being a warmonger was like the stereotype was a Republican, and there were more like young liberal people were very much against the Iraq War, even though like countering there is a tradition of liberal interventionism. But now I've just been noticing there has been all these major realignments of like what is considered liberal and what is considered right have totally shifted over just past the past well since Trump got elected basically.
Yeah, I guess what I would distinguish here is um, interventionism, global or foreign adventures, or just military in general. There's also the Cold War, right? So Reagan was perceived as a hawk, or even going back to Goldwater. You had the conservatives were tended to be more hawkish on the Soviet Union. Liberals tended to maybe be less hawkish. Um, but I think if you actually you stop conglomerating. Like if you disentangle maybe these philosophical or Henry David Thoreau, whoever you disentangle conscientious objectors, and maybe as a religious phenomenon with the Amish and associated groups. You disentangle that from actually looking at the war in particular, and I think you find that the big paradigm shifting wars that America has fought have been pushed by the Democrat Party. It was Woodrow Wilson and FDR, and now I would say to an extent Joe Biden with Ukraine, or at least the Democrat Party if we think Joe Biden is asleep at the wheel.
So between Biden and Trump, Biden's definitely more hawkish, but obviously, like just recently, Trump was using some pretty hawkish rhetoric about Iran. But overall, Trump is more non-interventionist in comparison.
I was on mute for a second. I disaggregate the Middle East from other conflicts. I think that, and also Vietnam. So Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, these were all conservative-led crusades, and they've all been failures. And whereas you look at the liberal wars, and I think they're good, So, I mean, maybe this is just me being partisan here, but that's my historical analysis. When liberals fight a war, they win. When conservatives fight a war, it's a disaster. It's a waste of money, waste of blood and treasure. So I'm not happy with how I think every conservative crusade is bad. I think George Bush, when he said, this is a war on terror, and he hinted at, these ideas that it was, he had a contradictory, looking back on it in the face of Trump, who's very explicit in saying we're going to ban Muslims and so on. But, George Bush did have this strong evangelical base that he appealed to on the basis of Christian Zionism. I think Christian Zionism is wrong. I don't want to have anything to do with it. I think there's a logical and rational way to approach Iran from basically sensible imperial policy. You don't want Iran to take over the Middle East. I'm not pro-Iranian. But at the same time, I look at our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I say, well, that didn't really help a whole bunch. And also our policy in Vietnam, I think, was very muddled and confused. So I think that's typically what conservatives do, is they approach these problems through a muddled and confused lens. They're very ineffective, whereas when liberals decide to go to war, they engage in total war, and they achieve a total victory. And that's, I think, when war is, good, is when you achieve victory. I think it's bad when you lose. So I think one side is clearly more competent than the other and also has better reasoning. I think, going in, like fighting in Europe in 2 world wars, I think made sense from, again, imperial policy. And I think fighting in Ukraine makes sense. But I don't believe in Christian Zionism as an ideology. And so I'm not saying that, therefore, I invert that and blame Israel for all the problems in the region, or that I think, therefore, Iran is our natural ally and they're good and we should support Iranian expansion. But it just means that the approach is all wrong. The bias is all wrong. And I don't actually think that the Democrat Party is going to be led around by Hamas or whatever Trump, it's calling Chuck Schumer a Palestinian. I just can't take that sort of rhetoric seriously.
Yeah, it's pretty laughable.
Yeah, so I don't take the Republicans seriously in foreign policy. They have a track record of wasting trillions of dollars in really silly ways and in ways that kill innocent people. War is not something to mess around. I'm not in favor of just any random war. I'm not just pro-war in a blanket sense, in the same way I'm not pro-pacifism in a blanket sense. I take it on a case-by-case basis. For example, I would support greater military integration with Mexico. I mean, I'm in favor of a North American Union. I think that we should expand southward. And so we're going to have to solve the problem of cartels, and that might not be a peaceful process. But, I would support that. I mean, you get sometimes Republican rhetoric around that. You get, DeSantis says we're going to bomb Mexico, we're going to bomb the cartels or something. I don't really take that seriously. That again, just bombing an airstrip or bombing this or that is not really, that's symbolic. That is not an effective way I mean, we tried that in Afghanistan. We tried just bombing the hell out of the Taliban, and that's not how you defeat a military force. You actually have to. You have to have boots on the ground. You have to engage in some form of colonialism if you want to take over another country, or you just have to kill a very large number of people, many of whom are going to be civilians. So there's no option where you just do a big performative strike and then you declare like Bush had that big banner. I forget exactly what it said. But it was
mission
like
accomplished.
Yeah, mission accomplished. Great job, Bush. And we're now in the Trump era, so I can look back somewhat sympathetically on George Bush, and say, okay, well, in some ways he was better than Trump. But at the same time, I'm not someone who says that, everything was just fine and dandy before Trump and Trump did all the bad things. No, I think Trump is a product of a process, and it started actually before George Bush. I think Ronald Reagan was a big part of the problem in that he allied with evangelicals. He didn't actually need to do that because, he won such a landslide victory. So it was a Pyrrhic victory or something, in the sense that he won this overwhelming majority of the Electoral College. I mean, he practically almost won it was like, 49 out of 50 states, something ridiculous. He didn't need those sort of margins. In order to achieve those margins, he included evangelicals and fundamentalists and the moral majority inside his coalition. He didn't actually need to do that. But at the time, it was thought, well, if we can win more votes, why not? What's the cost? What's the price? And there's a Republican strategist by the name of Kevin Phillips who wrote a book in 2006 called American Theocracy. And that was one of the first books, I would say, political science that I ever read. And, he lays out the case for why that sort of alliance is bad in the long term. And I think we're seeing the fruits of that now, from Reagan to George Bush to Trump. We're seeing that the Republican Party...
If you look at where Trump is winning, Trump is actually doing slightly better in the Sunbelt states like Georgia, and that has a lot of evangelicals, and even Arizona, which doesn't necessarily, but he's doing terribly in the states, the Rust Belt, upper Midwest states, where he initially won, that have a lot of Obama to Trump voters. He's actually doing poorly in the polling in those states.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think, a short-sighted electoral strategy. I don't think Ronald Reagan was actually like a fundamentalist or evangelical Christian. I think that was a cynical...
Trump was much more secular and hedonistic.
No, I mean, Ronald Reagan and Trump both come from Hollywood. I think they're both. I think both of them effectively are television actors, and they were trying to win elections, and so in a short-term sense, that's how they justified their actions. But I think the long-term fruits of that is that it's kind of a Faustian bargain or something. It's kind of a deal with the devil, and the chickens are coming home to roost, and now. It's going to eventually hurt. People are sort of waking up to this electoral strategy, and they're seeing the direction of it. And just in terms of practical terms, whether you're a Christian or you're not a Christian, I mean, white evangelical Christians, or I'll say white Christians broadly, evangelicals might have better birth rates, but broadly, white Christians are declining as a percentage of the population. So if that is your base and you're appealing to them, and that's your focus, if you can't disentangle yourself from that, then you're kind of riding a sinking ship. And I think the Democrats have, and again, a lot of people would say, well, the Democrats are just importing voters, and they're just appealing to people who hate America. They're creating a coalition, like an anti-white coalition. And even though that might be pragmatic in the short term, it also has long-term consequences. And I would agree that if we get and again, the right will argue that's already that the Democrat Party is already at the level of South Africa with Kildebor and BLM. Just diversity is a code word for hunting down white people and killing them. I understand that that's the position of people like Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk and Don Jr. And yeah, I'm pretty skeptical of that because unlike Malema and Mandela. The Democrat Party is still controlled by white people and Jewish people and maybe Indian people. I mean, it's a totally different demographic, and this it's like there's this black and white binary in the history of American race relations where everything is put into two categories of you're either white or you're black, and that's not since since the 1890s. That's really no longer the dominant ethnic division in America. It was white, Catholic, and Jewish until basically 1965, and since then we've had an influx of a Hispanic underclass that really hasn't changed our politics at all. But we're now starting to see an Asian expert class coming in from India and China, and I do think they'll change our politics. And the Democrat Party is. They have been traditionally more aligned with that, although we're seeing some tech CEOs in Silicon Valley and Vivek Ramaswamy and Nikki Haley maybe showing how that's not such a clear picture. But in terms of, the types of whites that the Republican Party appeals to, it appeals to evangelicals, it appeals to whites without education. I just don't see promoting the.
Well, I think Trump initially had this success with the white working class, more secular Obama to Trump voters, and that was a huge success in 2016. But my assessment is that he has some of them still, but he's actually lost a decent chunk of those voters.
Yeah, I'll lay out kind of what I think in terms of the short-term pragmatic strategy of electoral politics, and putting aside what I think is I think we should run the country with PhDs and not with working class interests in mind. But I'll just talk about how to win an election. And I'll say in 2016, Trump's number one word was globalist. It was the most powerful word he used because it combined three things: endless war, outsourcing, and the third one, well, I guess depending on how you view it, trade, so NAFTA, and immigration. So he combined these three things together: war, immigration, trade, broadly. He said, these three things are part of a single ideology caused by a single mysterious cabal of people called globalists. And I want to reference something that happened in the 2024 debate with Kamala. He said, Kamala is a Marxist because her father is a Marxist. That was his response to her saying, my plan is approved by Goldman Sachs. My plan is approved by the Wharton School of Finance. And he said, well, actually, I went to the Wharton School and...
it's a total transformation. So 2016, Trump was very populist. He talked about the forgotten people, and he had rhetoric against the elites. In 2020, it was like a generic sort of Fox News RNC campaign. Then the 2024 campaign, it's sort of like a Fox News campaign or RNC campaign of the right versus left dichotomy, but there's much more race baiting, I'd say race baiting, but it's more explicit than 2016. So it's sort of weird hybrid of, on the economic level, it's very right wing, more traditionally Republican, but there's more of the race baiting, about eating the cats and the Haitians eating the cats, that kind of stuff. Which is it is people. I mean, they do eat cats in Haiti, but it is dubious. And obviously the migrant crisis is a huge issue, but the way he talks about it was very kind of a bit crude and unsophisticated.
Sorry, I was muted. Indians eat cats in India. And are we going to call out, are we going to say, J.D. Vance, what's up with your H-1B wife and your H-1B kids? Are they eating cats and dogs too? I mean, no, it comes across as very crude and anti-intellectual. Well, yeah, and it's also completely hypocritical. I mean, in a
sense, also say it's punching down rather than punching up, which he did in 2016.
Yeah, and I would say that there was a different kind of racism in 2016. I think that the racism was not focused on these kind of extreme bestial animal caricatures like these like these Haitians. They're almost like another species because it's like Gollum from the Lord of the Rings, like eating a rabbit raw and wriggling. Like that's the image that's conjured up. Versus in 2016, he was saying, we're going to build a wall, we're going to ban Muslims. And, looking back on that, it's whatever. But I'm saying in terms of the messaging, how that appealed to people, it was saying there's masses of people, there's millions of people coming in. It's a different civilization. And if we want to define ourselves as an American civilization, we have to create these borders. We have to create these boundaries between ourselves and the rest of the world. So it really was this idea, and it was always phrased in terms of the globalists want immigration because they sort of want these cheaper wages, and I want to increase American wages. When you say things like the Haitians are eating cats and dogs, there's no implicit economic argument. There's no implicit pro-American identity argument. It's saying that there are these orcs. Who's that appealing to? It's an attempt to appeal to suburban evangelical white women, which, he can win more of those people, or he can win some of those people maybe with that kind of rhetoric. I don't think so, because it's too crude, but I think that's kind of the attempt in his head. Same thing during BLM, by the way. He said, oh, these people, BLM is going to come into the suburbs and I'm saving the suburbs. And it's like, well, you still lost the suburbs.
The funny thing is Trump didn't actually crack down on the BLM riots in Washington when he could have used the National Guards. But then he kind of does this thing where he goes soft, but then he goes overboard on the rhetoric.
Yeah, I mean
it's sort of the opposite of Teddy Roosevelt's speak softly and carry a big stick.
He's the opposite of Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden's rhetoric is extremely soft. Maybe that's just because he's old and senile. Fair enough, but still, whatever the cause for it, Joe Biden is a big softy. But in terms of the actual material results, when you ask yourself, are you better off today or 4 years ago? He has done the CHIPS Act. He has withdrawn from Afghanistan. He has actually introduced more manufacturing jobs than Trump did. He has actually helped the trade balance more than Trump did. So in terms of those things that affect people in those Rust Belt states, I think Biden has been better than Trump in a material sense, and people can just look at their bank account.
Well, that part is true, but what about the migrant crisis under Biden?
Well, okay, so the migrant crisis obviously is Trump's strongest case. It's his strongest argument. Unfortunately for Trump, I think that most of it is concentrated in liberal urban cities. I think most of the mass immigration into this country, it's not going to Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania.
It is slow. I'm in California. I think we have tons of immigrants from previous waves, but I think it's probably because of how expensive California is. But I think immigration and migrants to California, legal and illegal, is actually slowing down, and that's probably mostly explained by how expensive things are.
Yeah, it's difficult to drill down into the details of, where are all these people going on a state-by-state basis. But I'll just say in general, migrants are typically going where there's economic opportunity, and there's two parts to that. One of that is jobs, and one of that is benefits. And the places that have the most jobs and the most benefits tend to be big, blue, liberal cities. Whether that's California, whether that's somewhere else. I mean, you could argue that Atlanta or Georgia, because of a lot of Hispanic migration to Atlanta, that's why it flipped in 2020. So there's definitely an argument to be made that immigration is helping the Democrats. But in terms of those swing states where Trump needs to win, how much the Haitians eating cats and dogs, I think the reason why they're concentrating on it's happening in Ohio, which is not a swing state, but they're concentrating on that because they're trying to create this fear and panic in Midwestern people and saying that the government's about to dump 1 million Haitians on you, and they're going to be ravaging through the streets as cannibals. And because that's the implication, by the way, when you say they're eating pets. I mean, pets are kind of, we humanize our pets. I'm a dog mom, I'm a dad cat, or whatever the term is, cat dad. And so you're kind of implicating them with a form of something like cannibalistic. And that's oftentimes the imagery that the right wing uses, is to say that, migrants are like zombies. We've got zombie hordes coming over the border. We have to stop the zombie invasion of our country. So that's how they characterize these people. And I think for, in real material terms, the actual zombie horde that's plaguing the Midwest and large parts of the country is we've got an opiate crisis. We've got drug abuse, and Trump did nothing to slow that. In fact, it accelerated under him. And
he did talk about it in rhetoric, but he did absolutely hardly anything, basically nothing, to actually solve the opiate crisis.
Yeah, I mean,
I think his attorney general, I forget the details, but Bill Barr, I think he may have had an opportunity to prosecute the Sacklers, and he didn't do anything.
There's that nude Africa guy who's running.
Oh, yeah.
So Mark Robinson, he's not dropping out apparently. And so when CNN goes and they say, Mark Robinson, how do you respond to this evidence? And he says, what we should really be worried about is this opioid crisis. And it's like, what are you going to do exactly about the opioid crisis? Or, you Republicans have been ranting about this since 2016. What exactly have you done? What actual steps have you taken? And, my opinion is it's a difficult problem to solve because it's a multinational problem. It deals with...
there is a border immigration component to it.
No, absolutely. There is an immigration component to it. But look at the immigration under Trump. Trump saw more immigrants than Obama. So the idea that Republicans have any proof whatsoever, they had 4 years.
So if you look, I think the highest level, it was highest under George Bush and Biden, and then illegal immigration was, I think it may have been lowest under Obama, and part of the explanation may have been the recession and from 2008, but Trump, it wasn't that dramatic. Like, he didn't really do as much of a dramatic crackdown as his hardcore supporters would say.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different angles we can look at this. One is to say we want drugs to stop flowing across the border, and in that case, you have to secure the border, which he did not do. I mean, by point of fact, he didn't do that. And so, that would be one angle. The other angle is to say, immigration is a separate crisis from the drug crisis. And as you've mentioned, all of these things are interconnected. What's happening with the economy determines the flow of people over the border. And also as the economy gets worse, that is an incentive for people to become drug addicts. I think there's some evidence to show that, when people's lives get suddenly very bad, when they don't have job opportunities, when they're just sitting around unemployed, people tend to be more open to, hopping on some dangerous drugs than if they're living successful, productive lives. So, yeah, I think that there's a number of interconnected issues. I would say that supporting or securing the border, I think, is a reasonable goal. And I think also but in the meantime, because Trump was not able to do that, Biden didn't do that, nobody's done that, the best second thing we can do is just materially improve the lives of the people who are most affected by drug abuse, which is working class people. And so Biden has brought back manufacturing jobs better than Trump. I mean, obviously you could say it's still not enough, but I think in terms of the working class voters who are basically the targets of opioid addiction, they've seen their lives improve. And I don't think that's going to necessarily solve the problem in itself, because it's kind of like a virus. Once it gets in the country, I mean, we could improve the economy by tenfold, and I'm sure we would still have people who are addicted to these drugs. But yeah, I think the other component to it, besides closing the border, improving the economy, is giving help to these people. And I think, we had insane asylums, and I think we basically need drug asylums. I think we need to start picking people up who are clearly drug addicts, and we need to isolate them rather than creating a border around the country, which is, I think, just a temporary part of it. Drug smuggling will always occur. And by the way, you can make these drugs in America, so it's not They can come in through all sorts of points. They can come in through Canada. They'll find a way if there's a demand. So I think actually taking these people, segregating them from society, and making sure they don't have access to drugs, and also having it as a national policy. Because right now, what the Republicans love is localism and decentralization, and that's not how you solve this problem. If we've got tons of drug addicts in San Francisco and all these, urban centers, leaving it to San Francisco to solve the problem is not the most effective way to deal with it. If we could provide a national solution, it would be to say we're going to create, whether you call them asylums, cities of refuge, drug-free zones, whatever the name you put on it, whatever you think sounds best. Those should be built in Kansas. Those should be built in Nebraska. There's no reason why we should be spending $90,000 per homeless person in San Francisco when, for a tenth of the cost, we could, feed and clothe and provide all the shelter needed for these people in the middle of, Kansas or Nebraska or something. So I think we need national solutions. The Democrats are the only people who think at that level. Republicans always want to leave it to the states' rights, localism. Everybody is free to do whatever they want, but we're a country and we have problems as a country. If we want to effectively solve them, we need to marshal all of our resources and take advantage of, just concentrating every, it's you. And by the way, giving people a home as well. I prefer the term vagrancy over the homelessness, because you can give a drug addict a home and it will become a trap house. And, I've worked demolishing those places because, it becomes a biohazard essentially. So taking someone who's drug addicted, mentally ill, and giving them a physical structure is not the end all and be all of solving the problem. But I think it's Reagan who got rid of the asylums. And I think we need to bring it back. And I'm not saying that the Democrats have a plan to do that right now, but they're the ones of the two parties, they're the more likely to do it.
Do you have any thoughts on future realignments, political realignments, and shifts ideologically and in policy of both the Democrats and Republicans?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There's two ways to look at it, which is that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, and so you just kind of expect, okay, if nothing externally changes, the parties are going to continue to go in the current directions, which for the Republicans, I think means a more multiracial Republican Party. I think it means a less educated Republican Party. I think it means that they continue to make gains in rural areas. They continue to make gains among downwardly mobile people. They continue to become...
You think among Latinos too?
Absolutely. I think they're going to continue to make gains among Latinos. I think they're going to continue to scare the hose, to use a popular phrase. I think they're going to continue to scare...
So like a multiracial, like male-dominated working class party.
Yes, I mean, they're going to be groypers. Nick Fuentes is the future of the party in that respect. Alex Jones is his spirit is conducting a takeover of the Republican Party, even if his personal life is in tatters, or I don't know exactly how he's doing, but seems like he's having a tough time. But his ideas are gaining more and more currency. And again, Mark Robinson. I mean, look, I'm sympathetic. I personally don't care. Nude Africa, go wild.
That's pretty. I mean, some of his writings, I think they're pretty funny, actually.
I think Mark. I read some of his stuff. I thought it was also pretty funny. I think honestly, I think that we should. If there was a third party that was just called the anti-blackmail party. And it was just composed of politicians who have been, left or right, they've been embroiled in sex scandals. And they said, look,
oh, yeah.
you can't blackmail us. You can't control us. Probably Hunter Biden could be their presidential candidate. And, yeah, I think that would be awesome. But, yeah, so I don't have a problem really with his porn usage or something. But what I have a problem with is when he's confronted on it, instead of saying, I made some mistakes in the past. But
you should just own it.
Yeah, exactly. You just own it, and then, I don't know, become a libertarian or something. I mean, I would, if he started a podcast or something, I'd listen to it. But instead, he doesn't do that. Instead, he says, this is the fake news media, and it's just a whole slew of discrediting and saying like anything that a liberal says, if a liberal's mouth is moving, it's just a lie, and you can never listen to them. And that is not the way. We can't have a country. We cannot have a united country if one of the political parties is saying, yeah, you can't trust anything that the liberal news media says, and it just inflames and further corrodes trust in institutions, which at the end of the day we need. I mean, whether it's right or wrong, I mean, we need to have a sense of sanity, and I view the Republicans as driving that conspiratorial thinking. It's not to say that no.
So where do you see the Republican Party like going on policy?
Yeah, so I just see them as becoming more. I mean, if J.D. Vance is the future of the Republican Party,
Well, that's a different demographic. Then you get more into the sort of like the tech bro, like the right wing of Silicon Valley. That's another component.
yeah, I think those people at this juncture, I'm not sure what it'll look like in 4 years, but at this juncture, they seem to think that the Republican Party is like a headless beast, like it's a chicken with its head, running around with its head cut off. And so they feel that the Republican Party is like an empty vessel that they can fill or they can control, like a golem. Whereas the Democrat Party is filled with smart people. Like if you wanted to conduct a hostile takeover of the Democrat Party, it'd be very difficult because there's a lot of really intelligent people and structural forces and institutional forces that are resistant to radical change, actually. Now, maybe their rhetoric on transgenderism or something, a conservative considers that radical. But in terms of foreign policy, in terms of, economic policy and a lot of these things, like the Democrats always, they're kind of tacking toward the center. They're not doing weird, experimental, crazy things. And so, when I look at the future of the Republican Party and someone like J.D. Vance, I see him as this kind of high-low versus the middle. That's traditionally something that right-wingers attack the left on. But I see that as a high-low versus the middle strategy of we're going to have, at the high point, we're going to have the PayPal mafia, we're going to have Silicon Valley pulling the strings like puppeteers, and then below we're going to have this huge swath of underclass, whites, Hispanics, whatever blacks we can pick up. And this is going to be this huge, like a mass of people who you can tell anything. You can say, oh, the moon landing was fake, or, Hitler was actually the good guy. I mean, you could tell these people
so you're
anything.
saying the whole narrative that Democrats are elites and proles and Republicans are the middle class party, that's not actually the reality. It's much more nuanced.
In terms of voting, there's clearly, like, the reason why Silicon Valley has moved toward the Republican Party is they see it as something that is entirely malleable, as something that there's no spine there. It's like a gelatinous mob of people, and you can whip them into a frenzy for anything. You can make them pro-Bitcoin. You can make them you can make them abolish capital gains tax. Whatever you want to do with these people.
It's like how Trump was like, he put in that he got rid of the SALT deduction for like rich people in blue states, but now he wants to he wants to bring it back. So it's like, basically it is kind of, there's a fluidity, like any policy. Like the Democrats are more doctrinaire. They do have this more rigid, like hierarchical system.
Yeah, I mean, they're wonks. I mean, you look at the State Department. I mean, it's filled with wonks. It's filled with people who are highly educated. They're highly idealistic. They actually have, like, you might disagree with their morals. You might think they're silly or pacifistic or whatever ideas you have about them. But, like, these are not, they're when we use the term elite, we have to kind of distinguish between different kinds of elites. Obviously, Silicon Valley's full of elites. Also, if you work in the State Department, you're kind of by default an elite, but it's a very different sort of elite. Whereas,
yeah, so even though like your income might just be like upper middle class,
the people who run the State Department are not billionaires, but they do have a degree of power. Now, I agree that ultimately, at the end of the day, ideologies are shaped by more powerful people. And, I see there being three types of power: money, media, and military. So obviously, one influences the other. You can use money to influence ideology, and so on and so forth. But, I think that I would say that the left tends toward a priest class, whereas right-wing elites just tend to be rich dudes who don't have firm ideological or moral considerations.
So like the Brahmin versus Vaishya dichotomy.
Yes, I would say that there's some truth to that. It's not an absolute truth, but I think it's probably more true than it is false. And yeah, I'm concerned about what happens, and I've talked about this with civil rights. Of there is this vanguard, I think, with people like Vance and some of these Supreme Court appointments, where you see this weird kind of trad Catholicism that's very contrived. It's actually kind of antithetical to the Pope. Like Candace Owens is a sedevacantist. Like she thinks the Pope is invalid. So it's a very fringe, hardcore, theocratic worldview. And those people seem to have, with Peter Thiel kind of having a foot in both worlds, it seems like it's these coalition of the fringes of, extreme hardcore.
I forget her last name, but the Substack writer Daniela something, or last name starts with a P. She wrote an Substack article recently predicting that like Mormons will become the new GOP elite.
Well, maybe. I mean, I'm never going to bet against Mormonism. I think they definitely outperformed in 2012 with Mitt Romney, and I think also in 2016 that I forget the name, McMullen. Sorry, McMullen had a fairly large percentage of third-party votes in Utah. So Mormons, I respect the Mormons. I think they have a place in America. I would never discount Mormonism as continuing to exert influence. I guess I'm skeptical in terms of their ability to displace Catholics in the Republican Party. I think there's a much better argument just by the numbers. You look at the Supreme Court, you look at J.D. Vance.
Oh yeah, and the Catholic influence on the right, it seems to be increasing a lot recently.
Yeah, I mean, when there's a Mormon Nick Fuentes, I'll be more likely to buy into that, Mormon argument. But until that point, I just think the tendency right now is for, a weird kind of integralism that pretends. I mean, Chris Rufo spoke, I don't know if it was which bishop it was, but it's like, wait a second, 5 years ago you were a liberal in Seattle, and now you're talking about how it's the decline of Catholicism that's destroyed America. That's really weird, and I think probably you could follow the money, and maybe that might help answer some of the weirdness factor of it, or maybe it's just genuinely people have no religion and they're hungry for religion, and Catholicism seems like as good as anything, so why don't we hop on that train? Could be a combination of factors.
And the GOP, they could move a bit to the left in economics, not under Trump. Definitely not under Trump, but I'm saying like 10 to 20 years from now, that could happen as it becomes more economically downscale.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I could see Republicans doing similar things to what Kamala is doing, where she says we're gonna.
Well, Trump actually did come out in favor of price caps on credit card interest payments. So that is actually an example of that.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think that's possible. There is a division between different factions within the Republican Party at an elite level. People who are part of the ideological conservative movement, who are and you look at some guy like Compact Mag, like Sohrab Ahmari, and there is this attempt to push the Republican Party toward, more socialism or wealth redistribution. And yeah, I think there's a pretty good chance that in the next 20 years we find ourselves with a Republican candidate who is more socialist and welfare friendly than the Democrat. I think that's also the case as, when I saw these interviews from Springfield, Ohio, and, these were shared by far right or conservative people on Twitter. And in a lot of these interviews, these, very poor Republican people were complaining these immigrants are stealing our welfare, and this is this is a very different narrative from the 1960s, where it was,
Oh, so they're saying the immigrants are stealing our welfare rather than welfare is bad, and they're bad because they're on welfare.
Exactly, exactly. So, and you actually see this in countries like South Africa, for example. I mean, this is common around the world, or even Canada, where you get very recent immigrants or poor people, and they have a radical and vicious hatred for their competitors, essentially in the underclass. And so, in South Africa, as you know,
I mean, I think that's understandable if you're at the bottom of society.
I mean, I don't think it's good, but I guess it's logical in that sense of there's a form of selfishness, and they want to hoard the, you know, they're not interested. They don't even have a hope of being economically productive. They're just like, it's my money and I need it now, and these other people are taken out of the pot, and so I'm jealous of them. I think it's a really nasty way for a political party to form a constituency. I don't really like when Democrats.
I do see that as a more of a growing strain on the GOP in the future, especially
Yeah.
as like automation really kicks in.
Yeah, I mean, Tucker Carlson has critiqued automation. He said, we need to regulate automation to save truck drivers or whatever. And I don't think that's good economic policy. I guess, that's how he's become, part of how he's become such a popular figure is he's been willing to jettison his libertarianism. That apparently he was a libertarian, he was a neocon. Now he's like, yeah, this working class populist guy. He goes to Russia and he says, look, the groceries in Russia are cheaper. It's like, oh yeah, also people earn $20,000 a year. I mean, people are. I actually think it's closer to 13,000. I don't have the numbers on hand, but it's like, okay, yeah, it's $1 for a loaf of bread, but also, your income is a third of what it would be in America doing the same exact job. So not really the own that he thinks it is, but yeah, I mean that kind of rhetoric. It seems like Tucker and Alex Jones and JD Vance and like this is the coalition that's forming. Is it possible that after Trump there could be some kind of reassertion of like a Republican deep state in the sense of take someone like Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley is going to kind of realign the party. We're the party of Reagan. We believe in capitalism. We fight socialism. We don't hate immigrants. We also are strong on Russia. We're strong on China. So someone like Nikki Haley, I'm not saying this is a deterministic thing or that it has to be this way. But yeah, I guess if I had to say probabilistically, I would expect the Republican Party to drift more in that direction.
And with the Democrats, where you see them going, and you touched on something interesting at the beginning of the show. You see this sort of like high skilled immigrants, especially from India, but China to some degree, having a greater role in the future of the Democratic Party.
Absolutely, yeah. I think both.
Kamala is sort of like her mom's like Tamil Brahmin, so she's sort of part of that, a product of like high skilled immigration, and her dad too, who's like a professor from Jamaica.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the Democrat Party, basically all of the, if you actually drill down into the Hispanics who are voting for Trump or Republicans, it's Hispanics without college degrees. If you look at the Hispanics who lean Democrat, or more Democrat, they all.
Or especially like Republican, you have like Hispanic men without college degrees voting Republican, and Hispanic women with college degrees voting Democrat.
Right. So I'm basically suggesting that as immigration continues, the Republican Party is going to suck up all of the low-skilled immigrants. The Democrat Party is going to suck up the high-skilled immigrants, which is ironic because that's the opposite of their respective immigration policies, right? Trump is saying we want merit-based migration, we want more Indians and Chinese and less Mexicans.
With Trump, I think Trump did, like, he dog whistles. Like, sometimes he'll hint. Like, one time Trump said he wants more, like, white immigrants from Europe. Like, he'll hint at that. But basically, Trump's merit-based immigration policy and practice would be more immigrants from China and India.
Absolutely. I mean, Europe has a declining populace, so there's just not a lot of Europeans to go around. Even if we had an open door immigration policy with Europe, it would still be like you're just never going to get as with a merit-based system. You're never. We might see
like a modest increased immigration if we had we aggressively tried to brain drain Europe, we might see like some modest boost in the short term, but it'd be not a drop in the bucket compared to say China or India.
Yeah, if you had a clearly just race-based policy and you said we're only going to accept white people, that's the only way you're ever going to achieve that kind of majority European-based immigration. Otherwise, any other policy, whether it's a refugee-based policy, a merit-based policy, a random policy, you just look at the numbers and you're
Or maybe
be,
like it'd be interesting like if it was it'd be interesting if the GOP proposed like high skilled immigration but with like diversity quotas. That'd be an interesting scenario.
I mean, my personal feeling on immigration is that we should do a country cap of 1,000 people per country per year, and we should make an exception for countries with whom we are in an active defensive military alliance. So all of the NATO countries, Japan, we should have an expanded cap for them, and because we're in a military alliance, I think that it makes sense to allow for liberties, for freedom of movement of people, for friendly relations, to continue that going forward. I mean, I think part of the reason, anime is good for that reason, right? Cultural interchange helps strengthen the alliance between Japan and America. So I think that's true for European countries. That's how I would approach it. I mean, maybe somebody else has a better idea. I don't know that approach is likely to be promoted by Democrats or Republicans at this point. I see the Republicans in this ironic place where they are really winning underclass immigrants, but they're going for a Canadian-based system or an Australian-based system, which I think
if Trump gets elected, I think Trump's policies will be. I think Trump will probably like deport a lot of Venezuelans. But then if he's successful in immigration, like his merit-based immigration policy would be more immigrants from China and India.
Yeah, over the long term, you look back at Ronald Reagan, and his amnesty set a precedent for every following administration. If Reagan hadn't done that, we wouldn't be in the place we are today. Because what he did, and this is, Trump has actually done this on gay marriage, is Trump killed the gay marriage debate. Until Trump came along, you had, Santorum and Huckabee who were saying, the Supreme Court has gone too far and we need to bring back the Defense of Marriage Act. That was still, now, were they ever going to win on that? Probably not. But Republicans have this ability to kill certain issues. And I think Reagan essentially killed the immigration issue. And, Trump has tried to bring the issue back. I don't think he's been successful in terms of policy. But I think that what Trump could do is he could kind of double down on Reagan's killing of the immigration issue, and he could say, I, Donald Trump, the most anti-immigrant president of all time, I am going to create this merit-based system. And then afterward, it would be very difficult for Republicans to challenge that. I'm not saying that immigration reform is easy no matter which side starts it or finishes it. But I'm just saying that in the same way, if, Trump's, sort of pro-choice leanings. Also, I think he's, like I said, the Republican base at this point is extremely malleable. If Trump came out and he said, I support the right to choose, and I think that he could even win on that. I think a lot
definitely.
Of the hardcore ideologues would reject him, but the hardcore ideologues don't matter because most of them live in solid red Republican states. You don't need to win those people. I'm happy for 20% of Republicans in Oklahoma. If I'm Donald Trump, it's like, okay, yeah, I'll win Oklahoma by 1 percentage point. I'll win Arkansas by 1%. It doesn't matter. It's an electoral college. It's not a popular vote. So you have to go where the voters are in the swing states. And actually, the right to choose is an important issue that you could basically send a lot of Democrats home. They just wouldn't be energized to vote. So yeah, I think there's a great deal of flexibility, but I look at the money, like I look at who Trump's donors are. He's in major legal troubles. He's looking at the future of his children, and he's saying, it's not just that he needs to win the election, but he just needs a lot of money. For whatever purposes, he needs a lot of money. That wasn't the case in 2016. I'm not saying he was 100% self-funded, but he wasn't under 100 different.
Oh, so that explains why he's pivoted so far to the right in economics.
Yeah, I think he's not running to win the presidency. He's running to escape jail. I think that's why he's running. And I think the reason why he needs all the money from these people and he's cozying up to these people is because he realized, like, he doesn't have the option at this point to just say, like, I'm going to, because in 2016, he didn't think he was going to win. But he said, I'm going to try this strategy to win. It's going to upset Republicans. It did upset Republicans. Republicans, the core ideological conservatives, hated Donald Trump, and that's why the libertarians won such a big percentage of the vote. That's why Evan McMullin won such a big percentage in Utah. It's because he alienated the core Republican, like the core ideologues. But he said, I don't care about you. I'm pursuing an electoral strategy in the swing states, and it was a very small margin of victory. It was a coin toss. He didn't think he was going to win, but he said, you know what, I'm going to pursue this strategy because really I think it's the best strategy. And now he's pursuing a different strategy. He's not doing this Hail Mary pass to win the election. He's actually following the script. He's been given a script. He hasn't said the word globalist once in either his debate with
Yeah,
Biden
he says
or Kamala.
Marxist,
Yes.
leftist, even fascist.
Yeah, maybe you could have found him saying fascist in 2016, but he always would say it kind of like, well, people call me a fascist, but like maybe you're a fascist or something. He would kind of say it in this like joking manner. But now it is much more serious. He's like, these people are fascists and they're Marxists, and we believe in capitalism and the free market and Goldman Sachs. And yeah, it's a total change in tone. So, I think the reason he's doing that is because he realized, like in 2016, I think he was just like, look, I've had a good life. I'm kind of a narcissist. I'd like to be president. How can I, like, what's the riskiest play? Because he's kind of a gambling man. So, like, what's the riskiest play to win the presidency? Okay, I'm going to come out with this populist agenda, kind of a reverb of Pat Buchanan and Ross Perot, and I'm going to, like, shoot for the moon and see if I can get somewhere with it. He actually won, and it was a risky play. But if he lost in 2016, nothing bad would have happened to him. No one would have prosecuted him. He never would have gotten sued for anything. Only after he served for 4 years that's when the Democrats said, okay, we need to engage in some lawfare. We need to stop this guy from getting elected. And now he's in this hole. He's basically indebted to the legal system, whether he wins or loses these court cases. I mean, there's millions and millions of dollars he needs to fight. Otherwise, it's going to be bad for him. It's going to be bad for his family. And also on the positive end, now that he's had the taste of power, like, he wants more, and he doesn't just want more for himself because he's going to die in 10, 20 years, but he wants his children to be the new Kennedy family. He wants Ivanka and Don Jr. and Eric and all those people to someday inherit the throne and become senators, congresspeople, whatever. He wants to create a political dynasty. So that is it. I think if he lost in 2016, he would have focused on media. He would have created a Trump media organization. He would have been like the new kind of Alex Jones. Be the center, or I'm trying to think of Rush Limbaugh or something like that. But because that didn't happen, now he's thinking institutionally in the Republican Party, how do I create a lasting legacy? And he realizes you have to become friends with the donors. These are young people. Peter Thiel, Mark Zuckerberg is not a donor yet, but he's going in that direction. Elon Musk, these are young guys. They're going to continue donating. If they just read the script, they're going to continue donating for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And then, like George Soros' family, all that money is someday going to be inherited by a descendant, and then they're going to become loyal donors. So he's really creating like a trust fund for his kids in terms of a political movement. I think he doesn't care as much if he wins. He's not focused on winning or losing the presidency. He's focused on winning the donors, and that's where the script is coming from.
Do you have thoughts on the future of the Democratic Party, specifically on policy? And with Kamala Harris, do you think she's ideologically or policy-wise different than Biden?
I hope not, because I think Biden's been pretty good. I do hope that on the issue of immigration.
Well, Biden does have. The question is, does Biden represent the future of the past? Because he does have an old school Democrat streak to him. So, what do you see as more like the future ideology and policy of the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I mean, I think that. I think, again, when we look at the Republican Party, we have to look at two forces. One is what the underclass wants, and one is what Silicon Valley wants, and traditionalist Catholics and maybe Mormons or something like that. So that's the coalition that's pushing the Republican Party, or pulling it, depending on how you see it. With the Democrat Party, it's a different coalition. And so in the future, I do think that Asians, whether it's Chinese descended, Indian descended, I do think they're going to be more important. I also think that the Democrats are going to continue to consolidate their educated base. I think that you're going to see more technocracy. I think you're going to see.
So that would be technocracy like Trudeau's Canada, basically.
Yeah, I think that is an accurate representation of what the American liberal is like. I mean, if you took every single American liberal and you brought them into Canada and you ejected all the Canadians and put them in America, I mean, I don't think Canada would change a whole lot. I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between, a liberal who lives in Vermont and a liberal who lives in, Ottawa or something like that. I think they're basically the same species. And, yeah, I think so. So that's kind of the direction that Democrats probably tend toward. There's a lot of rhetoric about democracy and how Trump is a threat to democracy. I mean, it's an interesting word. I've written about kind of the deeper meaning of democracy and fascism.
Well, democracy, like what it means to them, more like the sanctity of institutions.
Right, exactly. And so Democrats, I think, are going to tend more toward institutional defense, and they're going to become, I think, less tolerant of Republicans. I think in the past, you did see in the Bush years, for example, there was a Democratic tendency to criticize, big corporations and to criticize, the FBI and the CIA and to criticize the fat cats and whatever. And I think there still are some elements of that, but I think that's going to continue to disappear because they have the sense they're locked in this existential struggle with the Republican Party, and they feel now that the narrative is shifting in the direction of the defense of democracy means the defense of our institutions. And that means that they're going to just increase their loyalty and start to expel people like Tulsi Gabbard or something. Now, she's interesting because she apparently works, I guess Biden promoted her to the head of a PSYOPs operation in the National Guard. So I don't know exactly what's going on with her on a personal level. Maybe she's a double agent. But on the surface, right, people like Tulsi Gabbard or RFK Jr., people in the Republican Party people in the Democrat Party who are challenging the foreign policy establishment on Ukraine, who are challenging the efficacy of vaccines, who are challenging the FBI and the CIA. I think Democrats are going to become less tolerant of these people and just push them out of the party and say, like, if you're not on board with our institutions, if you're not on board with our universities and the party line, like, you're not allowed in here anymore. I mean, I think there was a lot more during the Bush years. They tolerated a lot of craziness. And I think even now you could make an argument with the student protests that that's an example of the latest, BLM.
You even see kind of like we had this like the wokeness that came out of 2020. And you even see like the wokeness is still strong in universities and its strength is in academia and education. But you are seeing this return, this kind of pushback against wokeness and a return to like establishmentarianism and a more like establishmentarian centrist strain within the Democratic Party and establishment that's different than the wokeness that came out of 2020.
I also believe that what we claim or call wokeness in universities, I think it's the worst aspects of that are not necessarily like as spontaneous as they're dressed up to be. Like, I think that the BLM riots were a media creation. I think too.
It was unique. You saying it was like not entrenched as conservatives say it was, but BLM was very unique event that occurred during the pandemic.
Well, what I would say is it was not as spontaneous as people give it credit for. I would say that it was much more contrived and driven by big media, just blasting George Floyd every day on the TV screen.
So that is basically what conservatives will say. They'll say it was a sort of like top-down, like all conservatives will almost call it like a color revolution.
Sure. Yeah. No. And I would agree to an extent with that argument that there was. I mean, clearly it exposed the weakness of Trump. So I think it was actually successful in that respect. But I don't think that Democrats are going to color revolution themselves for the most part. And I think that obviously the Ferguson riots happened under Obama, so it's not necessarily a black or white thing. But also, when you look at these protests with Israel, I think that's a result of the media. If you actually watch Anderson Cooper or something, you watch mainstream media, and you read the New York Times or whatever, there will be articles that are critical of Israel in a way that I have never seen before. And so instead of viewing this thing as like there's this woke monster, it's out of control and we can't handle it and it's just going in all these crazy places, I'm like, no, these are really big media corporations which are tightly controlled that are instigating these events. And so understanding, why is that the case? It's really difficult if you're like, well, on the Israel issue, if you think Israel controls, every wealthy person in America controls all the media, then it's hard to understand why, CNN or something might allow some criticism of Israel. But I think it's a
or it could just
question.
be people tend to think it's really conspiratorial, but you could just have a figure who's kind of an establishmentarian, and it may have been like had a moderate Zionist position, but then they look at Gaza and maybe like they think, oh, Israel's gone too far. So not everything has to be like really conspiratorial. Some people could have just had like a personal reaction to like what's going on in Gaza.
I think individuals, like random individuals in the population, you can say that. But I think in terms of news media, I mean, clearly you look at a guy like Chris Cuomo or even Tucker Carlson, they were very popular. They had great ratings. They were let go for one reason or another. And so I don't think that that argument applies to big media. I think that big media.
Well, has been with big media. There have been articles like in the New York Times that have been more critical of Israel when that would have been less tolerated in the past.
So what I'm suggesting here is that these events, which people say, oh, the left has gone insane. Look at BLM. Look at these, Gaza riots or whatever. I would say like it's not an uncontrolled phenomenon, and if it becomes a problem in the way that conservatives are projecting, like, oh, Hamas is going to take over America, or the Iranian mullahs are going to assassinate Trump, like these sort of projections, when you take what is ultimately a limited event, BLM maybe took the GDP down by 1% of 1%. But it looks spectacular. It's obviously hits people on a visceral level. But to take that and project that forward and say like, oh, if you elect the Democrats, then we're going to get BLM times 10, and then you're really, because I argue with people on the right.
I'd say like with the migrant crisis, like Kamala Harris is fairly fairly liberal on immigration, but I don't think we'll get like. Depending on like the economy in Latin America and events overseas, I mean, that is a factor. I think she'll be very pro-migration, but even then, like, the question is like, will we get the chaos of like Biden's migrant crisis?
Which is hard. Like, maybe I want to distinguish between forms of chaos. And I have this argument with people on the right where they say, all chaos is equal. It's all the same. They become egalitarians when it comes to chaos. And I say, no, actually, white.
Oh, so you're saying that when they point out the double standard between how January 6th and BLM was treated?
Exactly. You're getting at. Exactly. And I say, like, when's the last time black people occupied a federal building? And they'll say, oh, well, they burned this police station down, or they attacked this, federal building. And it's like, no, that is qualitatively different. I mean, there was a plan from Donald Trump. He organized people together at the Capitol. He tried to pressure Mike Pence and state officials to change it. It was all part of it was a stupid plan. It didn't work, but it was a conspiracy effectively to overturn the election. Whereas when black people with BLM are like, throwing rocks or setting things on fire, there's no cohesive, like, constructive political plan. There's not even like a silly plan. They don't have, I just saw a video on Twitter from the BLM days, 4 years ago, where these frat guys are looking down at a protest, they're giving a thumbs up, and one of the protesters like throws a brick through the window, and they're like, "What the heck, man? Like, we support you. Why'd you throw a brick at our window?" It's because that's who these people are. They don't have a plan. They don't have an ethos.
They're just a lot of them are just people who are really antisocial.
Yes, exactly. They're antisocial.
What does say something interesting when conservatives point out the double standard, the right-wing populists, it does show you that a liberal ideological philosophical framework is ingrained in them because they can't really get how hierarchies work.
Exactly. Yeah, and this is the muddling that caused the disaster of Iraq and Afghanistan. This is the muddling that caused the disaster of Vietnam. It is always this double-sided. On the one hand, they're like, yeah, we hate the left. We want to crush the left. The left is inferior. But on the other hand, when it suits their purposes, they will adopt leftist ideology when it's convenient for them. And so they'll say, well, the left is worse than the right because, BLM caused more destruction than January 6th. And it's like, you can't understand the qualitative difference between a coherent, again, a silly and dumb coherent plan, but a coherent plan to overturn a presidential election versus randomly setting things on fire and throwing bricks. You can't understand the qualitative difference in how one actually does threaten our institutions, and the other one, there's damage, it's money, it's 1% of 1% of GDP. I'm not saying it's good, I don't encourage it, but I'm saying there's a qualitative difference. And just to quantify everything and to state that, a proud boy in the White House is equivalent to some random black person looting and setting things on fire. No, those are not the same thing. Because the proud boy in the White House, like, if we don't stop that person, if at some point there aren't federal officers with guns, resisting those people, they would actually, they would destroy our democracy. They would take over. Whereas, I don't care how much rioting you have. It will cause damage, yes. But it's the same thing as the difference between having heart cancer and getting your finger chopped off. Like, you can chop a finger off unless you bleed out or something, but it's not going to kill you. It's ugly. Okay, I lost a finger, whatever. But, having cancer of the heart, that's not something that's much more dangerous. Even though it might not be like chopping off a finger, it's bloody, everyone can see you're missing a finger. But whereas cancer of the heart, it might be invisible. You might not see it, but it's much more deadly.
You had an article explaining like why you're not a centrist.
I did have that article. Yeah, do you have a specific?
Because listening to you and reading your articles, to be honest, you sound more often like a radical centrist than someone who is stereotypically on the left. But I guess the problem with something like radical centrism is it is syncretism between you try to take the best of the left versus the right. But just human nature is that people will shift to one side or the other. And then the other difficulty is coming up to maintain like centrism, whether you're talking about establishmentarian centrism or like a dissident centrism. It is tough to come up to like unify people around some certain core principles. So you would actually reject centrism.
I do reject centrism. I think that you have to pick the better side, and then if you have problems with it or you think it needs reform, you have to work from within to fix it. I mean, that's even the case for people on the radical right who want to destroy the American government. You still sort of have to infiltrate the existing conservative movement, and you have to radicalize those people. So, it doesn't really matter what your strategy is. You have to kind of work with what you've got. Obviously, some far-right neo-Nazi or something who wants to destroy the American government, you're going to have to red pill people, right? You're going to have to take people who don't hold your positions, and you're going to have to radicalize them to your positions. Now, from my perspective, maybe I'm coming at it from the opposite angle. I want to go to the Democrats and say, hey, I love you guys. You guys are great, but we could probably improve on this, 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 and this. Now, I'm obviously not going to have an impact because I'm just some random guy, but that's my theory of what people should be doing, rather than saying, yeah, I'm going to be a radical centrist. I'm not going to choose a side. I mean, I think RFK is an example of how that's an untenable position. You can't just say,
Oh
I'm an
yeah, so
independent.
he ended up joining. So he's an example of that. He ended up, but he is so RFK Jr. is a radical centrist, but he did sort of like most of his life he was a Democrat, and now he's with the MAGA Republicans. It does show you that you basically, if you go that route, which I, to be honest, like that's the route I've gone, and but to be honest, like you just end up politically homeless.
Yeah, and I'm sympathetic to people who are politically homeless. I think that,
I mean, I'm basically politically homeless, and it's really frustrating because you do have kind of like you have like the narcissism, like look at my great articles and my great ideas, but the reality is you don't have any like significant like the best case is you can become like a personality and you have lots of like Substack subscribers, but you don't end up having like a greater influence.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that even though I'm saying I'm on the left, I don't think I've escaped from the dynamic you just described. I mean, I don't have a realistic hope of getting in the ear of Kamala Harris and shaping public policy or something like that. That's not my job. So I understand my own personal limitations, but I'm a fan of taking things to their logical conclusion. And if you're doing something where they're like, I think probabilistically, what I'm doing, what is there's like a 99% chance that no one who's influential or powerful will ever listen to me, and it's not going to impact anything. Yeah, probably 99% chance. But if I say I'm a radical centrist and both political parties are bad and we need to create a third new independent party, I mean, that goes from a 99% chance of failure to like a 99.9% of chance of failure or something. So,
So what is your objective with politics? Like, what do you hope to get if you were to get like super idealistic and put aside your pragmatism and cynicism? Like, what would you like to see the Democratic Party or the left become?
yeah, I would like to see it more boldly, explicitly adopt an expansive imperial program and to say, our goal is to create a North American Union. We want to have a full military integration between the American military, the Mexican military. We want to, continue to strengthen our ties with Europe. We want to colonize Antarctica. And we want to do all of this external work while bolstering our internal institutions. And we need to really highly value academia. We need to give every American citizen and the opportunity to go to the highest levels. I mean, anybody should be able to go to Harvard or at least to have the Harvard experience. So what I mean by that is, there are a lot of smart people in this country, and not all of them are college professors. In fact, a very small percentage of them are college professors. And part of that is because we don't pay our professors enough. And so very smart people, they want to earn money, and so they go into the private sector, and they never become a college professor. And so if we really want,
Oh, so you want to build up a large Brahmin class that's different, that's separate from the capitalist class?
yeah, I think we should understand and recognize the importance of education. It's the
Because I
foundation.
do think like one point is that capitalism and materialism can corrupt the most. The problem is that it can corrupt the values of the most intelligent cognitive elite of society.
Well, when I look at capitalist elites, you know, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel. I mean, there are also rich people on the left, George Soros. So I'm not saying that if you're rich, you have to be aligned with Donald Trump or something like that. That's obviously not the case. But I think that there is a tendency for financial elites to be fairly amoral, fairly non-ideological. They kind of are interested, and I actually think there's a point to the globalist moniker that Trump used. I'm kind of pro-globalism, but I think the point is that if the country is just being run by financial elites and we don't have any alternative source of elites, then yeah, they're just going to do whatever, increases their profits. And those short-term profits are not always best for the country as a whole. And, those people, as much as maybe they have done some great things, maybe they invented something, or they worked hard, or, whatever they did to earn that money. Okay, fine. I would rather that, Bill Gates be a billionaire than to divest him of all of his money and just give it to every, man, woman, and child and cat and dog in Springfield, Ohio, right? So I'm not advocating for total communism, but I am saying that, the money of these rich people, it ultimately derives from the foundation of civilization that we provide with our military, with our infrastructure, with our ideology, the mythology, what it means to be an American, the fact that we even have government, our civil religion. All of that is a basis on which capitalism rests. You can't have, I used to be a libertarian. I am no longer a libertarian, because I don't think you can just have a mythical, like a non-religious society. I think every society is religious, even if it's a secular religion. And the left seems to at least implicitly understand that, and they want to bolster our secular religion. The right wing wants to turn back the clock to traditional Catholicism or something. And I see that as a failure. I think if that was the way to go, then it would have happened many years ago when Catholicism was stronger than it is now. But I think all of these old religions are degrading, and the left is the only one willing to figure out what the new thing will be. And, the right just wants to return for the most part, and the left wants to go forward. And so, yeah, I think that, again, capitalism, it's an efficient system, market calculation, all of those Rothbard arguments. There's something to that. But it's like you can perfect a Rube Goldberg machine to be very efficient, but it's not powerful. And at some point, you have to embrace power over efficiency. When those two, it's like you have to embrace the good over the perfect. And that sometimes, I think, is the tendency of the right to betray America, to embrace treason, to support overthrowing the government, just because 1% of the population identifies as transgender and so on, and they make up all these myths about these people as saying they're hypersexual predators, which is not true, and they create these boogeymen out of them, and drag queen story hour and all of this stuff that frankly is petty. Like, it's not positive, it's not idealistic, it's not a vision for the future. It's just kind of this reactionary, oh, this makes me feel uncomfortable, and this is sort of scary. And it's like, well, actually, a lot of religions are scary. Eating the body and blood of Jesus Christ is kind of scary when you really think about it. Worshiping a guy up on a crucifix with nails in his hands and blood coming out of his eyeballs, that's kind of scary. The most popular holiday in America for young people is Halloween. That is a scary holiday. I agree that religion is kind of scary. Religion has an element of humiliation to it. That's true for Christianity. It's true for ancient human sacrifice cults. All religions have an element of humiliation. The left has an element of humiliation. That's part of human psychology. That's kind of how we work. BDSM is not just confined to the bedroom. Human civilization is full of, domination and submission on a psychological level, not just on the level of violence or, I'm richer than you or something. Like, we need these stories. We need a form of moralization. And so to me, all the right does is muddy the waters and try to revert to an older form of that, which clearly didn't work, or else it wouldn't have degraded. And because it did degrade, that means we need to move forward. We need to, go from strength to strength and say, okay, well, this is the paradigm that we're entering into. We have to follow this to the logical conclusion. It doesn't mean that, everything is perfect. If the left wing was perfect, we wouldn't be having political debates, because we would just have a hegemonic, there wouldn't be such a thing as polarization, because we would just all oh, of course, yeah, we agree. Like World War II, everyone said, we've got to defeat the Japanese. We've got to defeat the Nazis. We were united as a country. We put Father Coughlin away. We put, the America First, Charles Lindbergh, we put that away, and we united as a country. And so we go through these periods of polarization. We go through these periods of unification. We're currently in a period of polarization that cannot last indefinitely. There is going to be something that comes next. I don't think the left has all the answers right now. I don't think this is the final form of the left. I think it's going to continue to change and evolve and improve because, I'm a science guy. I believe in evolution. I think that's, the general trajectory of human progress and civilization is that things change
So
over time, things improve.
do you have any interest in HBD?
I guess I have been critical of HBD, and I've spoken with Sebastian Jensen, who you could say is a human biodiversity proponent, and I'm happy to speak with people and talk to people with that perspective. I don't think that it is. I think I told him. He said, do you think this is important that people, understand these arguments and maybe agree with these arguments? And I said, I think we should study human genetics, and I think we should study, how genes impact individuals and how they can impact groups. Sasha Gusev has written about this, I think, from a fairly intelligent angle, and he said, probably 15% of human intelligence is genetically influenced or even determined. And that seems to me to be like a fairly reasonable, statement. I mean, I think there probably is some kind of, and this is really where HBD focuses, and I think we could branch out from this, but it really focuses on the link between genetics and IQ. And I think, there's probably a relationship. Now, is it 100%? Obviously not. Is it 50%? Well, a lot of HBD people would say it is 50%. Is it 15%, as Sasha Gusev says? I think he makes some reasonable arguments. I'm not a biologist. I'm not a geneticist. I'm not qualified to go into the details of the research. I don't know. I never took a statistics course, okay? So I'm not going to fact check these people, and so I can't analyze those claims at the level of the expertise that's necessary to confirm or deny them. If you really want to understand those things, go get a degree in genetics, go get a degree in biology. And in fact, when I've talked to people who have those degrees, and I've gone to, thesis presentations for people doing, medical research, I mean, the idea that the universities are woke and, all discussion of genetic, human differences in populations is just totally banned and you're going to get fired.
I wonder if a lot of evangelicals are also they're probably opposed to genetic research for different reasons.
I would agree with that. I think evangelicals probably are. I've spoken when I've written these essays on why I'm on the left and I support abortion, and people say like, don't you understand? And in fact, I've talked with a few. Do
you mean support abortion for liberal reasons or eugenic reasons?
Well, I guess what I'm saying here, and let me just turn the light on. So what I'm saying here is that I think evangelicals and Christians do have, I mean, they are, in their Christianity, they are dealing with a set of egalitarian principles that are the foundations for liberalism and leftism. So they're kind of working with a parallel strain. Like if we consider liberalism and leftism to be a sect of Christianity or a secularized form of Christianity, then evangelicals are kind of running in parallel to that sect. And they have a lot of, they share a lot of the same underlying assumptions. I think there's a utility to egalitarianism. I think that it serves a function and a purpose in that it degrades the power of nepotism and it allows for meritocracy. So, I don't think it's a necessarily evil force, but I do think that when, I will talk to people, these so-called pro-life people, and I will say, look, you got two options. You can either have a Chinese one-child policy, and it's going to be a country of, 1.4 billion people, and they're going to increase in prosperity and have a growing middle class and be technologically advanced and all of these things. Or you can have no one-child policy, And China remains at the same exact level of development that it was in the 1950s, which was essentially, Botswana. Like they were at a sub-Saharan African level, except now there's going to be 4 billion people. And there's a lot of pro-life people who will say, I'd rather take, 4 billion poor Chinese over 1 billion middle-class Chinese. And yeah, I think that is something that pervades the right in terms of its, the hardcore ideological base and the intellectuals. I think they are kind of, that's a commitment that they have that I don't share. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't think that's like, I just don't have that axiomatic egalitarianism where I think like, oh yes, the life of a potential, not even a fetus necessarily, but the life of a potential human, because they'll talk about
It is definitely like a really radical, like the pro-life cause is a really radical take on egalitarianism.
Right, and I just don't think it's super. Like I think hundreds of years ago, people actually didn't think in that way. Like if there was a miscarriage or even the death of a child, it was not treated with the same severity as the death of a young child. I'm talking about 1-2 years old, because child mortality was high. Now, obviously, that wasn't a choice necessarily. In tribal societies, there is a lot of evidence for infanticide as a common practice. But I'm talking about, America's founding populations, European populations. Obviously, like infanticide was not publicized in the way that, you do have these people on the left who will say, I've had 12 abortions, and every time I have an abortion, it's awesome. It's like, again, that's such a 1% of 1% of 1% of all leftists are of that orientation. And they're generally trolling. They're generally like Satanist adjacent, and they're just doing it to make people mad, like they hate their parents and so on. Most people actually, generally an abortion is kind of a tragic thing. It's for either economic reasons, rape, incest, health of the mother. You don't have the father's not present. It's generally there's like a tragic or non-ideal situation going on. Most people can recognize that. Even if you're pro-choice, you can recognize generally people don't have abortions because their life is perfect. And I think that's reflected in the data that people who tend to have abortions tend to skew toward kind of a worse life situation, lower income, lower education, a number of issues. So, it's not to say that I'm in favor of an active kind of eugenic policy where we say these people are allowed to breed, these people are not allowed to breed, and I decide and I determine this thing. But to say that if you give people the right and you give people the choice, then everybody can make that decision. And in the type of economy we have now, which is not an agricultural economy, where you can just throw any manual laborer onto the field. It's not even an industrial economy where you can throw anybody into a factory. We've now moved beyond that to the point where you need to be educated to contribute to this economy. You cannot just be a manual laborer.
I think
you cannot
like
just be a factory
with
worker.
the economy, the job market doesn't match up with the IQ levels of the general population.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Peterson made that point. I don't think it should be controversial. And I think the idea that, Tucker Carlson has.
I mean, if anything, it should cut more people. It should be a way to cut people more slack for failure, because we just don't have a need for large numbers of unskilled or unintelligent people. But it's like we shouldn't really be like, oh, shaming people. You're a loser, and why are you so lazy? It's like it's just a reality of allocation, resource allocation, and the demographic reality.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on the context. I think if you're a parent and your child is slacking off and you want to go tiger mom on them or something, like I guess I'm kind of like anti-shaming. Like if people want to shame, let them shame. Like I'm not here to police other people's shaming tactics, because shaming probably works. It probably also makes people neurotic and hate themselves and whatnot. But I mean, I think shaming is an effective tool if you want people to get straight A's and stuff like that. But obviously, you're right that there are these issues where you have people where maybe their cognitive ceiling is too low for them to be economically productive in our society. And as society continues to advance technologically, that's only going to continue to get worse. And so in that situation, the idea that we therefore should be pro-natalist and everybody has to have as many kids as possible, and that this is the most important thing and this is the crisis of our times, yeah, I don't buy that. I don't think that's really.
I think the whole natalist politics, I think it's pretty foolish politically, unless you sort of like target it towards like the top 20% income bracket.
And there's not really a way to do that in a direct kind of obtuse, explicit way to say like, well, I think I'm trying to remember the name of the congressman who went to the Nick Fuentes event, but he was saying, we need to.
Was it Paul Gosar?
No, not him. He was actually, I think,
Matt Gaetz.
He was earlier. I'll give you the quote. He said, "We need to have our own babies for our own civilization."
Okay, I know he's from Iowa. I think something
Yeah.
King.
Yeah, King.
Steve King. That's
King.
right.
Right. So Steve King was kind of saying like, we need to be natalist, but we need to be natalist for white people and not for other people. And even then, I disagree with that. I don't think white people need natalism. I think that educated people basically need natal. If anybody needs it, if natalism is
So something like paying off like student loan debt relief, even something like that helps somewhat.
So my plan for this, I haven't published this essay yet, but I call it something like genetic moralism or something like that. And basically the idea is that historically human populations go through phases of replacement reproduction, where you have the top 10% of society, and because of sometimes
Well, that happened in Europe. So like in Europe, the top 10% of society ended up replenishing like the middle of society.
Right. So I think that's historically the case in pretty much every civilization, every large-scale society that has class distinctions. You're going to get that kind of genetic replacement. And so I kind of ran the numbers on this, and in the next 330 years, which in historical time span is not a lot, we could very easily, with just if birth rates remain the same as they are today, but billionaires have a TFR of 5, which is not, that's actually low historically, but if they have a TFR of 5, then they would genetically replace the global population. They would achieve 90% of the global population, in the next 300 years or so. And you can tweak those numbers.
Well, number of billionaires is very small. So what if it was like 3 for millionaires?
Yeah, maybe we could settle on 3 for millionaires. Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with that. I guess what I'm saying is that I don't think you need top 20% or even top 10%. I think personally, I'm saying top 1%, that those people probably, and the way that I think you
and
could
it is
do
higher. I mean, currently as it is now, it might be, well, it's higher than the middle class. It might be slightly below replacement level, but for the middle class, it's just a rough estimate, but for the middle class, it might be like 1.6 versus like 1.8.
Yeah, it is already the case that the top 1%.
So it's U-shaped, like highest for proles, or like a J shape. So highest for proles, lowest for the middle class, and then somewhere in between for the wealthy.
Right, that is true. And I think we should turn that J shape into a linear curve that starts low at the bottom and high at the top, or maybe kind of an exponential curve where nobody has children except the people at the top. Now, again, that's not something that I'm prescribing as like a top-down policy where I'm going to sterilize anybody except the people who fit my definition of the Ubermensch. That's not what I'm advocating. I'm saying that is a natural process that historically happens, and I'm saying that we should merely remove the impediments, like we currently have divorce law, alimony payments. We have all these things where if you're a billionaire and you have a girlfriend, They're going to come after you. Israel Adesanya's girlfriend, he was never married to her, and she's, trying to get millions of dollars from him. So this is a problem. If you're a rich man and you're trying to have kids, there's a legal apparatus that is biased against you and in favor of, it's kind of this constant lawfare that you deal with. You have to worry about the child support payments or the alimony or whatever, divorce. And I think we should remove a lot of those legal impediments by saying marriage is between a man and a woman. It's a contract like any other contract, and there's no government regulation of marriage to define.
So privatize marriage via contracts.
Exactly. And I think the left is more likely to do that than the right. You can make an argument that because the left is more friendly to women and women have an incentive to keep, the laws in place as they are, that's not going to happen. But I think on a cultural level, the right tends to be more of defending the institution of marriage, and you got to man up and marry that, single mom and so on.
Okay, so that's an example where you do sound like a radical centrist.
I mean, I'm happy for people to put whatever labels they want to put on me. I've made that choice, and I'm happy with my terminology. But if somebody, as long as somebody's not using a term as a slur or as an attempt to discredit me or something, whatever box people want to put in me, it's not offensive to me. I've written 2 articles that I felt it was my best attempt to say why. I don't personally choose that label, but I think that there's in the actual practical reality, the privatization of marriage, which is one way to put it. I wouldn't actually use that term. I would say abolishing marriage. I think we should abolish marriage, and if people want to form economic contracts and say, well, we're having sex, we're in a relationship, we have kids, and therefore we have these obligations to each other, that's in the same way as any other contract is between 2 people, and the government is not going to, intercede and say, no, we've decided that you're in a common law marriage, and that means this and this and this. So I'm just in favor of abolishing marriage, and I don't think Christians or the right wing is ever going to consent to that. Maybe some some weird, there are some anarcho-Christians who will be like, give unto Caesar that which is Caesar. So I understand there are exceptions to that, but I'm saying in terms of the broad 2 parties that I think, establishing gay marriage was a step toward that, actually. I think that, polyamory is a step toward that. I think so. The left has consistently been on the side of abolishing marriage. The right wing has been on the side of defending marriage. And so you can you can label me a radical centrist, but I'm just saying in practical reality, the left is better on this issue, in my opinion.
Before we wrap up the show, is there anything else that you want to say about the election? And do you have any predictions you want to make about the election?
Yeah, Kamala is going to win. I think Trump is going to outperform with Hispanics, and I don't think it matters. I think that, he's going to win Arizona, Nevada. He could even pick up New Mexico or something crazy. But yeah, I think he's going to fall flat in the.
So Kamala will basically win by winning over more white voters.
Yeah, I think she's going to win in Pennsylvania, Michigan, maybe even Wisconsin. So yeah, I think she's going to pull it off. But it is a close election. I won't have to hold my head in my hands and be like, oh my gosh, my whole worldview is wrong because.
So are you a tepid Kamala supporter? Or you're pretty enthusiastic about Kamala. Hello? Your mic's off.
Oh, sorry for that. If I could get 100 people to vote for Kamala, then that's great, but it's probably not going to decide the election. So, there are a lot of people for whom democracy is a religion, and they think that it's like taking a sacrament. Like I go to the polls and I vote, and this is like my confirmation. This is like me saying the, some kind of collective prayer for the country. I'm not really into the pomp and circumstance of voting and things like that. So whatever. I mean, I'm not. I'm just making a prediction. I'm saying what my preference would be, but I'm not like knocking on doors and being like, you have to vote for Kamala Harris, and if you don't, the country's going to be over or something. Because I think the country can survive Donald Trump. I think that it'll be worse, but I think we'll survive, and we'll beat him in 4 years. So I'm not going to be black-pilled if Trump wins. I'm not going to start crying and hysterically screaming and whatever that the liberals were doing in 2016. So I won't be getting hysterical about it. But yeah, I think she should win. I think she will win, and we'll see November at some point. Maybe the election will drag on past November 6th. Maybe it'll be a contested election or something, but hopefully not. Hopefully she wins a decisive victory. It's a crushing victory. That's my hope for November.
And do you want to plug your Substack? Anything else?
Yeah, it's deepleft.substack.com. It's where you can find me. I post way too much. I post like almost every single day now. So there's people complain. They unsubscribe. They say it's too much. It's like you're spamming my inbox. But
oh yeah, I feel bad when I see the unsubscribe some of my email. I feel really bad about it, but I don't get them. To be honest, like if I write an article, I space out my articles, but if I get like 2 unsubscribes from an article, it makes me feel bad.
Yeah, I feel bad as well, but it's you can't, you can make some of the people happy all the time, all the people happy some of the time. So it is what it is, and yeah, that's where you can find me, and I'm just gonna keep putting out a bunch of stuff and see how far I can take this. This I guess is my job right now. We'll see how long I can last. So if you wanna become a paid subscriber, please do that. I don't know if saying that actually like makes people feel more generous or more likely to do that, but I guess that's the only thing I have to tack on, other than thanks for preparing these questions and taking the time to interview me. It was great.
Yeah, great show, Deep Left. Thank you so much for being on. It's been a great show.
Yeah, thank you, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Great, and I'll send you my email.
Cool. All right. Yeah, send me that, and we'll get you the MP3.
Great. Take care.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. All right. I'm gonna send this MP3 over.